My sister publicly made fun of me for selecting a jade bracelet that cost $85. She referred to me as cheap in public. I said nothing at all. However, the place fell silent as my spouse entered and gave me a gift. What came next, I'll tell you. Before I start, I hope this story provides you strength if you've ever felt overlooked, misunderstood, or subtly undervalued. Please consider enjoying this video, leaving a comment, and subscribing to Reddit Family Tales. We are so grateful for your support. People often say that time heals all wounds. I'm not entirely sure. Some wounds simply become quieter. They don't heal. When no one is looking, they still throb, even when the bleeding stops. I'm Eliza Hammond, and I was the cheap one for most of my life. I was not impoverished or destitute. I was simply invisible. She was the type of girl who wore the same black flats for 5 years, brought homemade gifts to birthday celebrations, and smiled nicely when her suggestions were not taken seriously at the dinner table. I didn't shine in the house where I grew up, where looks were crucial. Was Sabrina my elder sister? She was dazzling. High shoes, a chuckle that made people pay attention in restaurants, and perfume that signaled her arrival. She was aware of her connections, charm, and ambition. However, I chose a more subdued route. I work for a tiny charity organization that provides school materials and books to children in remote areas. I go to bed knowing that I've accomplished something significant, even though the remuneration isn't flashy. That's more than I can say about the empire of luxury handbags that Sabrina created, using mom's connections and dad's seed money. However, I was always the weak one in my family's perspective. I was too fragile to generate tangible income. I was too sensitive to make sound judgments. I am too sensitive to deserve a seat at the table. It used to make me cry. I used to cry quietly behind closed doors. I observed Mom's eyes brighten with affection for Sabrina during each family meal. Dad turned to me to ask whether I had brought dessert after asking Sabrina for stock and real estate advice. After a while, though, I stopped crying. I got sick of showing them how hurt I was, not because it stopped hurting. I decided to get Mom a jade bracelet for her 60th birthday last month. The money transformed her into something tiny and lovely, reminding me of the lady she used to be. The bracelet was a gentle shade of green, reminiscent of the spring foliage. For weeks, I had been saving. On a Wednesday afternoon, I entered Jade & Gold's. The store was silent, the kind of silence that causes you to breathe more gently and stroll more slowly. When I walked in, the elderly woman behind the counter grinned. I was at ease, until the voice behind me was heard. Eliza. That voice, half laughing, half critiquing all the time. I pivoted, naturally. Sabrina. With her crimson lipstick, diamond studs, and snappy blazer, she appeared as though she had just stepped out of a fashion magazine. Naturally, she wasn't by herself. With her phone and coffee in hand, her aide followed her like a shadow. Sabrina took a brief look at my bracelet. The piece was simple, with a modest setting, pale jade, and a price tag of about $85. Mom, is that what you're getting? She raised her eyebrows as she spoke. Her helper suppressed a grin. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Sabrina chuckled. Eliza raised us. She is worthy of more than whatever it is. Don't be cheap, really. I sensed the familiar warmth in my chest. I felt the sting of humiliation. 2 additional customers were present at the store. Pretending to browse, one turned away. After glancing at me, the other person turned to face Sabrina and grinned as if she agreed. I parted my lips, then shut it. What would I say without coming off as defensive? I simply set the bracelet on the glass counter with gentleness, and I said, "Perhaps I'll return at a later date." With triumph, Sabrina cocked her head. She exuded a sense of triumph. I stepped back. I was trying not to cry. I was determined not to cry in this place. Never again. Just as I was about to head out the door, I heard a sound. I heard the gentle chime of the door opening. I didn't anticipate seeing the cautious, methodical steps of a stranger. The voice said, "Hey, love." Warm, steady mine. When I turned, my heart pounded in my chest. He was there. Daniel. He was wearing the same basic navy suit without a tie that he always wore, as if he couldn't quite make it seem like he cared about money the way other guys did. His presence created silence, rather than noise in the room. People paused and raised their heads in response to his silence. Sabrina turned too. Her brow furrowed slightly as she attempted to place the face I could almost hear the instant she registered him. I said, "Hello," as he approached me. Daniel put a tiny dark blue box in my palm with a smile on his face. With a sense of predestination, he declared, "I found it. You enjoyed the peony carving from the Ming Dynasty. It took me a long time to find a real one. Would your mother approve of it?" The crate was heavier than it appeared to be. My eyes widened as I gazed up at him. "You didn't need to." Daniel, however, merely grinned and leaned slightly closer while speaking quietly. "Aren't you going to accept something mediocre once more?" Behind me, I heard Sabrina take a short breath. The woman who had been mocking my choices suddenly found herself speechless. She glanced between us, attempting to interpret the situation. Wait, are you two acquainted?" Daniel gently turned to face her. "I am her spouse," he stated simply, and there it was. The quiet. It was a silence that weighed heavily on your ears and chest. I observed Sabrina's expression. As if someone had disconnected her spotlight, the light in her eyes flickered. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She had always been so certain that I was by myself, that she was superior to me, that I would be the quiet, impoverished sibling in the corner forever. She looked like a charity case dressed in cheap shoes. She was unaware. She didn't inquire. Because the only thing that was considered to be alive in our household was loudness. And I had long since learned to keep quiet. I was the one who stayed behind as a child. At the age of 22, Sabrina moved to New York to launch her fashion tech business. She returned home for Thanksgiving each year with bolder stories and new shoes. Every time she walked through the door, our parents, especially Mom, lit up as if they had been waiting for her all year. People only partially listened to me when I spoke. Usually Dad interrupts me. Every time I spoke, Sabrina would cut me off and correct me. "What about Mom?" She had that tight-lipped smile all the time. "I wish you'd do more with your life, that is." I recall getting Mom a handmade scarf one year from a local weaver. It was soft as breath and dyed in beautiful pastels. She glanced at it, gave it a single nod, and put it down. Sabrina brought her a high-end purse in the meantime. Like a holy relic, the whole family handed it on. At one point, I stopped trying to impress others. I concentrated on my task, the nonprofit, the children. Even if no one saw, I put my all into it. And of all places, I met Daniel at a library fundraiser. With a furrowed brow, he was reading a children's book at the tea station, seemingly unable to comprehend how something so insignificant could convey such a powerful message. That day, we spoke for 2 hours. My degree was not questioned by him. What inspired me to assist strangers, he inquired. He didn't inquire about my relatives. He inquired about my morals, then he inquired as to what I feared. I was honest with him. I feared being forgotten for the rest of my life. He made no claims to alter the course of history. He just stated that he would never ignore me. We got married on the low. There was no extravagant ceremony. Not a word. We were alone in a small garden surrounded by 2 circles and the soothing sound of the wind rustling through the trees. I kept my family in the dark. I didn't hide from them out of shame. However, they didn't ask any questions. Mom never once inquired about my relationship status. Sabrina never questioned what had changed in my life. I was a prisoner to them. Additionally, People stop checking when they believe you are not moving. Daniel looked back at the glass exhibit in the jewelry store. Should we still receive the first one as well? He pointed to the $85 bracelet as he inquired. I thought it was lovely. It also seemed to be you. My throat constricted. He wasn't making a point, not because he was attempting to do so. He meant it. Sincerely. I gently squeezed his hand as I reached for it. At last, Sabrina, who was still standing aside, spoke. You kept your marital status a secret from everyone. I answered, I didn't think anyone cared to know. That caused her to blink. A pause. Then she turned, and all of a sudden she realized she had a schedule to adhere to. Or maybe she simply couldn't remain there any longer in a setting where she wasn't in control, and the balance had changed. Without uttering another word, she departed. However, the woman behind the counter who had greeted me with a grin when I first entered moved in closer, her eyes gentle. She remarked, Your husband is very kind. Daniel caught my attention. Indeed, I do indeed. That evening, we avoided discussing it. We didn't talk about it until we got home. We didn't bring it up during our dinner or our typical side-by-side dishwashing routine. Daniel was habituated to making quiet sufficient. To be honest, that was more important to me than any speech. However, it wasn't a painful silence at home. It was sort of a holding. Nevertheless, I had changed in some way. Not the shock or even the silence, but that minuscule spark of something else behind Sabrina's eyes was all I could think about. I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Was it envy perplexed? Or was it just the realization that she didn't know me at all? Mom's birthday supper arrived a week later. Naturally, it was a formal family gathering at that pricey rooftop restaurant in the city, with linen napkins and a wine list that was longer than the menu. No place was ever quite enough the kind Sabrina always chose. I got there a little early with Daniel. I carefully wrapped the peony Jade in a dark velvet pouch and stored it in my purse. I had considered telling Mom in secret, avoiding the contrast in the show. Daniel simply stated, however, let them see who you are. Eliza, that isn't pride. That is sincerity. I thus brought it. I experienced the recognizable constriction in my chest as soon as we exited the elevator. As Sabrina spun in her new lace shoes, I felt like I was 12 again, wearing the dress from the previous year to church. We followed the hostess to the big table by the window. Dad was there already, drinking something pricey and golden. He gave Daniel a nod more out of courtesy than affection. Mom looked up and gave me a quick smile before turning to look over my attire. Neutral phrase. Nothing mean. However, there was no warmth in the atmosphere. Sabrina had not yet arrived. Naturally, she was generally the last to enter. A vision in crimson, she arrived with ease 15 minutes later. People turned to look. People turned. She cherished that. She had always done so. She air-kissed Mom and complimented her jewelry before slipping into her seat across from me, like a queen taking her throne and singing, "Sorry I'm late." She kept looking at Daniel. The quiet buzzed, but she said nothing. One by one, the courses arrived as dinner got underway. The topic of light conversation was Sabrina's most recent company expansion and the big international investor she was pursuing. Her stories made Mom chuckle readily. Dad accepted her comments with a nod. I sat there as well, listening, smile when appropriate. Before Sabrina turned to face me with a glass of wine in her hand and a casually charming voice. What have you been working on recently, Elizabeth? One library at a time? Are you still rescuing the world? The table gave a little laugh. I grinned. This semester, our most recent initiative actually assisted 2,000 children in obtaining school supplies. Sabrina blinked, then flashed that recognizable smile, the one that stopped short of her eyes. That's really lovely. Actually, you've always been such a pure heart. Mom added. Even if it's not financially rewarding, it's nice that you're doing something meaningful. As usual, I felt the room tilt once more. Love was contingent upon reciprocating compliments. However, I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to respond yet. I chose to wait instead, until the rich chocolate cake with gold flakes and sparklers for dessert arrived. Mom smiled broadly and offered her arms at that moment. What presents are we going to open first? Sabrina didn't hold back. Naturally, she presented me with a sleek black box that contained a gold necklace from a designer I couldn't pronounce. She went on, imported from Milan. Only 5 of these necklaces exist in the entire world. Everyone gave a clap. Dad examined it as though it were part of a museum exhibit. Mom touched her chest and gasped. Oh, Sabrina, it's beautiful. Then everyone looked at me. I then got up, gently. I took out the velvet purse from within my bag. I whispered, I know it's not from Milan, but when I saw it, it made me think of you. It wasn't the woman adorned in jewelry, the one who organizes events and welcomes guests. Before school, my mother would braid my hair. She was the one who, while humming lullabies, folded the laundry. I set the purse down before her. Slowly, Mom opened it. She gasped. The jade, which was pale green with delicate rose patterns and carved into a delicate peony that was flowering in stone, gleamed in the candlelight. Nobody said anything. Even Sabrina narrowed her eyes and leaned forward a little. This, Mom murmured, tracing the curves with her thumb. This jadeite is authentic. Where did you go? Daniel's voice was calm when he eventually spoke. Finding it took several months. However, Eliza was fully aware of what she was seeking. Mom glanced at us. Her face changed, as if she were readjusting all of her preconceived notions. Sabrina broke the silence. Her voice was tighter than before, yet she still said, It's beautiful. I folded my hands and sat down carefully. I just wanted it to have some significance. Daniel grabbed my hand as we made our way to the parking garage that evening. That's what you did, he said. Without speaking loudly, without providing any evidence, they also noticed you. I gave a nod, but they weren't on my mind. I was reminiscing about the shy little child I used to be who constantly shrank to make room. For the first time, I no longer felt small. The next week went by without incident. Silence, however, did not equate to tranquility in my family. It indicated strain beneath the surface, akin to a tautly drawn wire that is ready to break. Mom sent me a note on Wednesday morning. It wasn't a call. It was a brief, oddly formal text. Would you be able to visit this Saturday? We must speak. Your dad will also be at home. There won't be a single emoji used. Not love, Mom. That's all. Daniel calmly glanced at the message before asking, Want me to accompany you? I paused to reflect. I shook my head after that. Not just yet. I sensed that something was changing in myself as much as in them. I was eager to confront them fearlessly for the first time in a long time. As usual, the house smelled of subtle lavender and lemon wood polish when I got there. The scent was familiar, but now it felt colder. Or perhaps I was simply taking notice of things I had previously overlooked. Like she was waiting for a conference to begin, Mom sat at the kitchen island with her hands folded neatly. Dad tapped one foot slowly against the baseboard heater, while standing at the window with his arms folded. Mom said, Sit. No embrace? No grin. I took a seat. She wasted no time. Why didn't you disclose your marital status to us? I stared at her. Because nobody inquired. Dad gave a snort. That isn't a response. It is for me. Mom's mouth pushed shut. Are you aware of how that made us appear? You surprise us with this during supper. In Sabrina's presence. In public view. I didn't make any mistakes. I've known Daniel for 3 years. You simply didn't notice. They didn't answer. The quiet was as long as an endless corridor. Sabrina called. Mom finally said. You were cold to her, she remarked. That you embarrassed her while she was merely attempting to involve you? It nearly made me chuckle. Add me. I inhaled, and just in case grabbed a tiny envelope out of my bag, the one I had made after the birthday supper. It wasn't retaliation. It was a document. It was in my own words, a document. Across the island, I slipped it. What is this, Dad inquired. My resignation, I muttered. He scowled. You are not employed by us? No, I replied, but I've tried to prove something to you for the majority of my life. To Mom, to Sabrina, seeking attention. And I've come to the realization that I no longer have to do it. Mom gazed at the envelope as if it were going to stab her. I'm not upset, I added. However, I'm over being the forgettable daughter. You only consider me when you want to project generosity. Dad laughed. You're exaggerating. I responded softly. No. I'm telling the truth. I slowly and steadily got to my feet. I'm relocating out of state with Daniel. Daniel received an offer for a job in Oregon. We depart the next month. Mom's eyes got big. Did you not intend to inform us? I simply did. I waited to hear something, anything at all, to request that I remain. She would miss me, she said. She reached for my hand, but she merely blinked. That told me everything. I saw the sky fade from peach to sunset while sitting on our porch stairs later that night. Daniel came over with 2 tea mugs. He didn't inquire about the outcome. When he realized that quiet might convey more than consolation, he simply sat next to me near, but not crowded. I looked over at him. Do you believe I was too severe? He didn't respond right away. He simply gazed at the yard. Then he said, No, I believe you were at last clear. With my hands encircling the warmth, I sipped my tea. I muttered, I don't think they'll ever understand. Daniel gave a nod. Perhaps not. However, you can live in peace without their comprehension. Something settled within me as I looked at him. I had been pursuing approval for years like a shadow, something elusive, and constantly shifting. I was moving into the light now, not because I prevailed. However, I had ceased my running. I got a letter in the mail a few days later. There was no return address provided. Only a folded note written by hand in a slanted, pointed handwriting. To be fair, I was unaware that you possessed it. I'm still baffled by you. But now I see you. I spent a lot of time looking at the paper. I folded it back after that and put it away. I didn't cling to the past, but rather remembered that truth has the power to shatter even the strongest of stones. No one in my family contacted me in the weeks that followed. No messages, no calls, not even a chain email from Mom that was forwarded as she used to do on holidays. There was only silence. It hurt at first. There was that old part of me that still yearned for someone to get in touch. I miss you even if I don't agree with you, is enough. However, nothing appeared. Strangely enough, I didn't break down. Rather, I discovered tranquility in the silence. True tranquility. I didn't act as if I was hollow when I repressed my emotions to keep the peace at family dinners. This was not like the others. There was silence here, room to breathe. I spent more time on the porch with Daniel. We planned. We looked at Oregon homes in the gentle morning light, with their wraparound porches and creaking flooring, where I might create a new rhythm away from all the measuring sticks I had been used to growing up. While going through old boxes one evening, I came across a stack of letters I had written in my 20s but had never sent. The letters were addressed to my mother, to Sabrina. I even kept one for me. I took my time reading them. I had written in one, "I don't require your loud love. All I need is for you to notice me when I'm not talking." I put the package away after closing it. Those were no longer necessary for me to carry. Then, roughly 2 weeks before our departure, an unforeseen circumstance occurred. A knock on the door was heard. When I opened it, I saw Sabrina standing with her arms folded and sunglasses resting like a crown on her head that she had neglected to take off. She appeared to be exhausted. This was different from the glitzy, "I've been on 3 red-eyes this week" type of fatigue she typically wore. Her complexion appeared more lifeless. Her eyes were less sure. She stated, "I was in the area." She wasn't, as we both knew. I moved out of the way. "Would you like to enter?" As she entered carefully, her eyes darted around the house as if she were seeing it for the first time. I pondered whether she noticed how basic our house was. However, the warmth was palpable. I made tea. She said no. She did it every time. The living room was where we sat. She kept her hands off the pillows. She remained perched on the edge of the armchair, seemingly on the verge of rising. Then she made a statement that caught me off guard. "I spoke with Mom." I waited. "She claimed that you were chilly because you made her feel ashamed." I turned to face my hands. "However," Sabrina added, "for the first time, I did not agree with her opinion." I looked up because of that. She let out a sigh. "I suppose I've always believed that I understand our family. I believed I was upholding the family's reputation, being the one with strength. However, perhaps I simply made more noise." I didn't answer. I couldn't tell if this was a monologue or an apology. However, I paid attention. "I don't like that you hid Daniel from us," Sabrina said, casting a downward glance. I arched an eyebrow. "But," she hurriedly continued, "I understand. If I had received the same treatment as you, perhaps I would have done the same." Again, there was silence. However, this time, it did not feel painfully prolonged. It simply sat alongside us. "Why didn't you ever fight back?" she then inquired. "All those years. I considered that." Then slowly I responded. I didn't want to become the very thing I was fighting against. Peace was what I sought, not to win disputes. I desired love, and I was aware that shouting louder wouldn't get it. Leaning back, Sabrina's eyes were shiny. She appeared older at that time. Her vitality was not limited to her face alone. "I was always anxious around you," she remarked, "since you didn't require anything from anybody." I was surprised by her statement. "You didn't chase attention," she added. "You didn't plead for permission. I was afraid of that. I suppose I thought, perhaps you knew something I didn't if you weren't attempting to impress us." I grinned subtly. Or perhaps I was simply exhausted. Slowly she nodded. Then she took out a tiny package from within her bag. She said, "This is from Mom." She was unable to utter it aloud. "However, she desired that you possess it." I accepted the mail without opening it. "Will you be here for a while?" I inquired. Sabrina gave a head shake. "No. I simply wanted to catch up with you before you went." I escorted her to the exit. At the threshold, she paused. She then leaned in and gave me a hug without much fuss. Fast. She embraced me with ease. However, it was genuine. She mumbled, "I'm not saying I understand you," as she retreated. "However, I believe my hatred for you has diminished." I gave a soft smile. "That's a beginning." She went out. I held the envelope in my lap as I sat by the window that evening. Before I opened it, I held it for a long time. There was a note inside. It contained only a few lines. Occasionally, I'm not sure how to approach you. You feel like a stranger despite my intent to parent you. However, that jade item brought back memories of the girl who used to scribble poems on napkins for me. I regret not clinging to her more. Mom, no signature. No. Love, Mom. However, it was something. I refrained from crying. Not now. Rather, I put the folded note in the drawer next to my bed. I placed it there to reassure myself of my sanity, not to preserve it. That even though it was too late, I had been noticed. And occasionally, it's better to be late than never. On the day we departed for Oregon, the sky was cloudy with gentle gray clouds that seemed to be embracing the rooftops. There was no grand farewell, no crowd waving, no crying and hugging as you run to the car at the last minute. A new chapter is silently waiting to be lived, just Daniel, me, 2 pieces of luggage, and ourselves. We didn't turn around. As we traveled across 3 states, we saw the scenery change, from city skylines to hills, and finally to deep verdant forests that seemed like they were taken from a painting. There wasn't much silence in the automobile. It was quiet. With each mile that went by, the old noise, the expectations, the judgments, the whispering behind our backs faded away even more as we rolled down the windows and let the breeze flow through us. I remembered that Mom's envelope. Even though her phrases were harsh, the little curvature of her calligraphy suggested gentleness. It did not solve all my problems. However, I had stopped searching for repairs. All I needed was clarity, and I had located it. It was a tiny house. Daniel promised to fix the porch with groaning steps, but he never did. The house had deep green siding, white trim, and a porch. We took our time unpacking. We both brought 3 copies of the same book, which made us laugh. We drank coffee on the floor before the furniture arrived. Late into the night, we discussed what we could create rather than what we had left. In a wooden box beside the kitchen window, I grew herbs. I cultivated mint basil and rosemary. It was the first time I had ever grown something for myself. Then a little envelope showed up in the mail one morning. The return address has no name on it. Only one text, printed in that recognizable acute slant on a white card inside. Perhaps you'll teach me how to be quiet without feeling insignificant someday. S. I grinned. I smiled, not because I required more information from her, but because I didn't in the end. Daniel was offered a consulting job with a tech incubator that convened just once a month. Otherwise, he worked from home, assisting small firms that reminded him of himself and playing with algorithms. And me, I launched a literacy initiative in my community. It was straightforward on weekends. A mobile library van filled with books that had been donated was parked outside of neighborhood schools and farmers markets. Children would run barefoot on the gravel to pick up stories with rumpled spines and old covers. Daniel accompanied me on a few weekends. I went alone other weekends, and I always felt a sense of healing when I watched a child with big eyes tuck a book into their backpack. Not every wound requires bandaging. Some people simply require room. I received a call from an unidentified number approximately 4 months after we moved home. I nearly didn't answer, but I felt compelled to. Hey. A pause occurred. A familiar yet uncertain voice then emerged. Hey, it's Dad. I took a seat. He cleared his throat. I am aware that my language skills are lacking. You believe I don't listen, and I know it. And perhaps I didn't. I didn't respond as you expected. He hesitated once more. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about the important things. Additionally, I believe I should thank you. I remained silent. I simply let him continue. I've seen photos of your tiny library. Sabrina showed it to me. She didn't seem like the kind of person who would follow your updates, but I suppose she does. My throat constricted. Well done, Eliza, he remarked. Additionally, I want you to be aware of. I wasn't ashamed just because I hadn't said it earlier. I simply didn't know how to express it. I breathed out slowly. Thank you for calling, I then added. He refrained from crying. I didn't either. However, there was no wall between us for the first time in my life. There were only two people trying to establish a connection in the middle of a phone line, each on a different end. Be safe out there, he said as he hung up, and let your hubby know that I'm grateful. Yes, I did. Daniel remained silent as usual. After giving me a quick forehead kiss, he returned to stirring the soup. I listened to the breeze in the trees when I stood by the porch that evening. Here it sounded different, kinder, smarter. There were stars in the clear sky. I also didn't feel like a supporting character in someone else's life for the first time in years. I felt in the center, complete, observed. Not because I'd yelled at you. However, I had finally realized that I didn't have to. Not every victory elicits applause. Some triumphs are subtle, quiet. However, they remain equally fulfilling. In situations where you are not rushed, time moves differently. The days gently blend with one another out here. The wind carries stories through the trees. People on porches wave. It doesn't feel like a show in life. It simply is. More than anything else, this experience helped me become a better person. It's not a dramatic altercation, not an emotional apology. However, the peaceful constancy of being with someone who never asked me to be shinier, louder, or wealthier. That's just the truth. I was sitting by myself on the porch swing Daniel had finally constructed for me one Sunday morning in the early fall. He surprised me with it on our anniversary after hand-sanding reclaimed wood from an old barn down the road. Like most good things in life, it was strong, though it creaked a little. In my hands was a cup of tea that was still steeping and warm. Slow twirling ribbons of steam rose. Copper and gold leaves covered the yard. Near the fence's edge, a lone red maple stood tall and proud, its branches quivering subtly in the breeze. With a cadence akin to breathing, the swing clicked back and forth as I swayed slowly. Then a surprise happened. Far away, a gentle automobile door closed. The sound of footsteps echoed across the gravel. It wasn't Daniel, because he was out getting groceries. I stood wary, yet interested. I saw her as I got to the porch's edge. Sabrina. This time, she wore no designer coat. No cosmetics. Only jeans, a cozy sweater, and a worn-out appearance that seemed familiar, as if we were meeting as two ladies, emerging from a long darkness, rather than as sisters. Something was in her hands. She smiled weakly and replied, "Hello." I also didn't think I'd be here. I remained silent. I let her approach the porch steps by herself. She surveyed the area. "This place is lovely," I remarked. "It's quiet." She gave a nod. "I believe I require some of that." I indicated the swing. "Take a seat." She paused. Then she did slowly. For 1 or 2 minutes, we rocked in silence. She then gave me the picture frame she had brought. Inside the frame was a photo I hadn't seen in decades. I was 9 years old and holding a paper flower I had created for my mother. Beside me, with her arms folded and her eyes rolled, stood Sabrina. And yet, she had a funny expression on her face. She appeared to be even more proud than before. She remarked, "I discovered it while organizing one of Mom's drawers." I suppose she kept more than we initially believed. I gazed at the image for a while. The young girl had not yet felt the pain of rejection. Even if it was difficult, she had not forgotten how to love. "She died last week," Sabrina said. I pivoted. She lowered her gaze to her hands. I was unsure of how to tell you. I was skeptical that you would care. I let out a slow breath. It was the gentle pang of reality, not surprise. A few months ago, she received a diagnosis, Sabrina added. Did not want medical care, said to be worn out. I made an effort to argue. She refused to move. She raised her head. I was present when she passed away. Tears started to well up behind my eyelids, but they weren't a deluge or a collapse, only a slight rise. Your name was said by her, Sabrina muttered, just once the previous evening. She uttered, Remind Eliza that I still remember the lullabies. It was that. I turned my head away. My throat shut. The wind brushed over our faces as if to say, It's okay now, while the leaves rustled like whispers around us as we sat there. After Sabrina left later that afternoon, I went inside and brewed some tea. When I left for college, I wrapped myself in the cardigan my mother had knitted for me. Despite the stretched sleeves and thin yarn at the elbows, the cardigan exuded her scent. Starch lavender and an unidentified substance. Cup in hand, I took a seat on the swing once more. As the sun began to set, gold covered the yard. There was a silence, the kind that envelops you like a memory. Daniel discreetly emerged and took a seat next to me. He didn't inquire as to what transpired. He simply put his hand over mine and joined me in observing the sky. And I had the following thought following everything. The years of being invisible, the hurt, the silences, I was right here. I was not only alive, but also whole, but complete. Because the story doesn't always finish with a thunderclap of retaliation or a dramatic showdown. Occasionally, it concludes with a porch swing, a teacup, a picture frame with hands that were shaking. And when you can no longer lie, the sound of your own name is whispered in the darkness. I've come to understand that justice is inherent in itself, a silent one, but long-lasting.